Hey everyone, welcome back to my Python programming tutorials. In today's video, we're going to be going over part 2 of the functions. In this video, we're going to be covering the single responsibility principle, returns versus printing within a function, and function scope. Now the function scope part I will be going over on a piece of paper or like the whiteboard with you guys. There won't be much coding involved in that, but it's just to explain the fundamentals of function scope. So to get started with the single responsibility principle, all it is it's a principle that states that every function or class should have responsibility for exactly one task within the program. Basically, you should never write a function or a class that has like multiple purposes. For example, if you go back to the lesson that we were doing before, we had a function called the quadratic function, and we should never write a quadratic function that, for example, acts like a cubic function and a quadratic function at the same time. If we wanted that sort of functionality, then we would write two separate functions, one for the quadratic equation, one for the cubic equation. So just keep in mind when creating these functions that each function should have solely one purpose and one purpose only, and it should just do that task and that's it. If you want to do another task, well then you would need to write a separate function for that. Moving on to a very important difference, this is going to be the return versus print. The function print is used within Python to log to the console, and that is solely its purpose. All it does is it prints something out to its console. A lot of people starting out might get confused in shell because when you print something and you return something, the result looks very, very similar. I can show you right now. If I were to print 5, my console would have this 5 over here. Likewise, if I were to define a function called 5 and it would return 5, and then I were to call this function, well, it looks like they're doing the same thing, even though this is a return statement and this is a print statement. In reality, this 5 gets logged over here only in the shell. It would not get logged if I were to run this from the terminal or from any other non-shell environment. So again, printing's only purpose is to log to the console. However, the return statement, it doesn't print anything like I mentioned. It will return a result to the person who called it. If we were to assign a variable to the result of this function, that variable would then store this value of 5 because the value of 5 is being returned from the function. To give a better example, I'm going to scrap together quickly two functions and I'll show you the difference between the two. So here they are. I have put together a function called func1 and it will print hello. And then I've made a function called func2, which will return the string hello. So now if I were to run func1, you could see that hello gets logged to the console. And if I were to run func2, well, hello gets logged to the console, but you can already start seeing the difference. Here, the actual string representation of the string hello gets logged to the console. However, here the entire string gets returned. That's why we do see these quotations indicating that the object being returned was a string. If I were to go ahead and assign a variable to func1, you could see that now this hello is appearing here as well. And we're going to examine why that is right after I write this second line of code, which will execute the second function, which was func2. Now you can see nothing has been printed. So if we go back up here, the reason this hello gets printed is because, well, this is a function call right here. So what happens when this function gets called is Python goes over here and it executes the body of the function, which says to print hello. And that's exactly what that does. And then there's no explicit return statement, but when there's no explicit return statement, Python just automatically returns none. So now A should hold the value of none because none was returned from the function. So if I were to go ahead and log A, you could see that nothing happens. Even when I go ahead to print A, now you can see that A holds the value none. However, if we examine this call right here, func2 is being executed. So Python goes and executes the body of func2 and it simply says to return hello. So that's why you don't see this logging of hello over here because, well, there is no print statement here. So Python is not going to print anything. It's simply going to return the string hello. And so now B would hold the return value of this function. If I were to go ahead and log B, it has hello, and if I were to go and print B, well, it's gonna print the string representation of hello. So that's an important difference within the shell. This is the object, the string, and then this is the string representation of B. Those are two different things, and I will talk about them once we get to Dunner methods, but that's going to be a little bit down the line. Another thing to note about the return statement is that once the return statement is executed, the function terminates. So one of the ways we can show that is right here. If I were to print hello world and then right here I were to try and print bye, you would see that once I execute this function over here, hello world prints and then hello is returned, but bye is never printed. That is because, again, the function terminates once the return statement is executed. Another cool feature of Python is their unpacking feature, and we've kind of seen this already in the iteration tutorial. What you can do here is, let's say we have a function that returns a tuple 1, 2, 3. We can unpack these values immediately as we get them returned. Let's go ahead and log what func3 returns. We can see that it's a tuple, just like it says over here. So what we can do is we can say A, B, and C are equal to func3. And this in Python is called unpacking. We're simply going to assign A to be 1, B to be 2, and C to be 3. And then now if I go ahead and log them individually, you could see that A is 1, B is 2, C is 3. This is a neat feature of Python. It allows us to kind of pull apart the tuple being returned or a list being returned very neatly like this. So now moving on to function scope, and like I mentioned, I am going to switch onto the piece of paper over here on the right. That's why you see this kind of new setup. But talking about function scope, basically there are two types of variables in Python, one of them being global variables, and they are defined in the global scope, meaning they can be accessed anywhere, hence the name global. Global variables are generally kind of frowned upon. People say to try and avoid them as much as you can, and you usually, if you want to declare a global variable, you'll write them in all caps, something like global underscore var, and then you'll set it equal to something. So this is generally how they're defined. They're kind of frowned upon in the community, so there's obviously a time and place to use them, but try and avoid using them all the time. Now in Python, what happens when a function executes is that the program kind of forgets about all existing variables except the ones that are in the global scope, obviously, and the ones that are passed in as parameter. And I'll kind of show you what's going to happen when a function executes on the piece of paper, just because it's a little easier for me to draw. So if we go ahead and we trace this code, I'm going to use these squiggly braces. By the way, pardon me, I'm not the best at these braces, but I'm going to be using these to define scope, and this is going to be the global scope. So within the global scope, the program will execute. Now Python will go from top to bottom of the program and sort of execute what's going on. So let's grab a look at our code and see what's going on. First we have a comment, so Python's going to ignore that, and then we see a function definition over here. So what Python does is it says, okay, func, and then that's equal to some sort of, I'm going to put this box, and it's going to be a function. It's named func, and it references this function over here. Once it sees this definition, Python doesn't look into the function and actually execute it. It just knows that there is some sort of function defined that takes in 3 parameters, and then it does this stuff, but it's not going to actually execute it. Now we go on and Python sees this def main. So now it knows that there's a function called main, and again it's going to reference some sort of function called main, and it'll do like whatever there. And again, Python doesn't execute anything within the body because the function hasn't been called. So the next line of code is right here, and that is an actual function execution. When Python sees that this function has started, it will open up a new scope, and this will be the new function scope, and this will be within the function main. So now we start executing what main has from top to bottom. So main has a string called hello, and it's equal to a string hello. Python saves this value to the variable hello, and then it moves on to the next line, which says to execute function, this one right here, with parameters 1, 2, 3. So this function now starts a new scope. This will be in the func scope. And what happens when this function gets executed is these variables will be copied over into these variables. A will now be assigned to 1 because A is the first parameter here, and the first parameter that was passed was 1. B will now be assigned to 2, and C will be assigned to 3. And then the function, after it copies all those parameters over, it will go on and execute whatever it is within the body. So in this case, it's a pass, meaning the function will just return none, like I mentioned. This function will terminate, and we will go back to the place that called us, which is up here, and this will simply be none. And then the function will terminate, going back to wherever in the code we were called from, which was over here, and then that will terminate. So essentially, this will terminate, and then this will terminate too, and our program will finish. So if I go ahead and run this right now, you can see that we have no problems, nothing happens. I can actually include a print in here just to show you that the program works. So there it is. Within this function right here, I can access A, B, and C, and they will obviously reference 1, 2, and 3 because those are the passed arguments over here. So there they are, 1, 2, and 3. However, what I can't do is I cannot access this variable hello. So if I try and do something like print the variable hello, that won't work because this function has no idea of what the variable hello is. If we look over here, all this function knows about is just 1, 2, and 3. So these variables a, b, and c that have been assigned. That's all the function knows. It has no idea of where this variable hello came from, and you can see that we will be getting an error over here. It says name error, name hello is not defined. This function right here, this func, has no idea what that variable hello is. And that's what function scope is all about. That Python, in a sense, forgets about the variables that have been declared in the previous function, and it only remembers the global variables or the variables that have been passed through parameters. And that's why passing arguments is extremely important to functions, because sometimes we want to mutate variables from other scopes. That is it for part 2 of functions. Hopefully you guys have understood in depth about how they work, about the return statements versus print statements, as well as function scopes, and a little bit about the single responsibility principle, how each function should carry out only a single task. Now, I would suggest going over the function scope again if you haven't fully understood it, because it is in a sense the basis for like recursion, which we will be covering in a future video. And so yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If this video has helped you out with anything at all, please like and comment as to what I helped you out with. Like usual, if you guys are new to the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. And yeah, I'll see you guys in another video.